All right, let me give you an update real quick. You may or may not have noticed it when you walk in. The cabinet's gone. So what Mike, supposedly the lead custodian, is doing is he's drilling out those locks, and he's going to get me the machines, but he thought he would get them to me sometime today, but it hasn't happened yet. He took them right around lunch, and since we don't have them, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what's in the actual book that we have for the class, and I'll talk for 45 minutes to an hour, and that's it. And then the rest of the period will be lab, but we should be able to start up then, because supposedly what he said he was going to do is drill those locks out, have me take the machines out, put them, safely secure them in the office someplace, and then he was going to go and get new locks, put them in, and make sure there were two sets. He was going to give me a set of keys, and he was going to give a set of keys to Tammy, where she was going to lock that set away. All right, and I've got my keys are in here. I mean, I've got a key for the business division door, I've got a key for this room, and I've got a key for Doug's room next door. That key, as far as I'm concerned, I might as well just use to wipe myself with, because I don't need it for anything anymore. That's a little bit too gross, though. So, and I probably shouldn't have put that on tape. So, but that said, I'm going to go over some of the stuff that's in this book. I don't want to go on with that guy's series, because he assumes then that you've got a machine there and you're doing this stuff. So it's not going to really pay to do that. So my hope is that by Monday we'll be on the system. All right. I'm not worried about it. This is stuff we still had to go over, so it's not like this is hurting us to do this. It's just putting us a little bit farther behind as far as going over it. Now, for the other classes, because people have asked, for tomorrow, I am going to spend the first hour just going over chapter 12, which is the last chapter in the Joomla book. The rest of the period will be lab. The rest of the semester will be lab in there. So you're going to have what? This is week 7. You're going to have 11 weeks to work on that project. All right, starting next week when I come in here, because I get in here earlier than you do, I'm going to start retaping those lectures, because we had some issues because we didn't have the images, etc. So I'm going to go back and redo the entire book, all 12 of those chapters. Then in the next chapter, or the next class, the 161, I said I was giving you 2 weeks of lab. So you had lab this week, you'll have lab next week also in the 161 class. All right, so that's lab all week, so that should handle that. Next week on, I can show you this if you care, and you know what, I can even show it to you if you don't care. How's that? But to show you real quick, this is what we're going to be building next week in Java, just so you can see it. Take a second for it to come up. And tomorrow is the only lecture, I'm going to give a lecture from 3 to 5. I'm going to go over chapter 8 in the PHP class. If we get done with all of that in 2 hours, then on Tuesday of next week, I'm going to go over chapter 9. Then we've got, out of that 13 chapter book, the first 11 chapters are done. So I'm going to give you your next assignment. You'll again get probably 2 weeks of lab time. Then we're going to go over the last 2 chapters, and we're going to do a project as a class. All right, so you see this, though. This is the one that we're going to build together next week as a class. It's pretty simple. It really is. There's only 2 files in it. Doesn't look like much. All right. That's pretty obvious what that does. That's a Java applet that does that. So that's the one we're going to do as a class. All right. And as always, it seems like we work on it as a class, and then some people fall behind. Some people are a little more typing challenged. So I'll probably end up putting my copy of it out there. The one that you're going to be assigned, and this will be the last regular assigned program, is going to be this one. Whoops. And you just need one Java file. And when I run it, it looks like this. It's pretty simple looking. All right. But if you look over here, notice, so you've got to build this by using the different lines and squares, etc. stuff in here. And notice what happens. If I click on the window, it goes black, or it shuts, whatever you want to say. Open, shut, open. Same with the door. Same with the other windows. So I can have everything closed, everything open, etc. Does that make sense? That's going to be your next assignment. And that, if you look in here, I've got there's enough code. All right, a couple hundred lines of code, because I've got comments and stuff in there in mine too. All right, and so we will go over that thermometer program on Tuesday. That'll probably take the entire hour. Then on Thursday of next week, we will go over the material in chapter 14 from your Gaddis Java book. That'll be it. You won't need that book anymore after that. unless you're working on homework. But I know that's a bigger book, so you don't have to worry about bringing that with you anymore. All right, and you'll again have at least a week of lab time. Then we're going to start on Android stuff. All right, I've already been getting that stuff together and starting to write some stuff on there. So, all right. So again, I want to just go over some of the stuff that's in our other book, the Programming in Objective-C book, and I've got that up on the screen here. The first chapter is your typical blow-off chapter. It's only 3 or 4 pages long. It talks about how the book is organized, etc. And the only thing I did want to mention on that, because it is sort of important, is notice how he does organize it. There's 3 logical parts. All right, the Objective-C language, which is almost the entire book, just so you know that. Part 2, the foundation framework, which is like 2 out of the last 3 chapters. And part 3, Cocoa, Cocoa Touch, and iOS SDK, which is about the last chapter or so. All right, so there's like 23 chapters or something like that in here. Maybe there's more. I don't remember. But it looks like there are 21 or 22 chapters. And the first section of the book is like about the first 17 or 18 chapters. All right, and the other 2 sections are each the last couple chapters, 2 chapters and then 2 chapters. They'll talk in here about a framework. As you can see, a framework is a set of classes that have been logically grouped together to make developing programs easier. Why am I even mentioning that? Because it's like a package. It's like those Java packages that you've been importing. The idea is the same. All right? So, the majority of the stuff that's in this book is not GUI. All right? I want to show you GUI right away. So we'll talk about some of the stuff that's in here today, but I don't plan on lecturing a lot out of this book after today. All right? If we've got 11 weeks left and you have 10 of those weeks that you're on the system and you're writing all sorts of stuff, to me that's a win. That's not a loss. All right? So that's what I plan on doing. All right. So they break it up, and I'm not going to run through these. All right? But we're going to go over some of the chapters that are in here today. All right? Chapter 2, Programming in Objective-C. Again, today is the first time I was watching a video that recently got put out there that I got to see Xcode 6. I had not seen it yet because all the machines that we have got Xcode 5 on them. What I'm going to do on the machine I have this weekend, I don't know when, but I'm going to do it sometime. Good news is the Packers are playing tomorrow, so I should have my Sunday free. Aren't you going to watch the Bears? No. So I should have time, hopefully, to do it on Sunday, and that is I want to go and look at, see whether or not we're going to need to do an upgrade on the operating system on those machines, and we will need one on Xcode, but I don't remember what operating system is on there. If we have to do that, you guys can do the upgrade. We can do it as class starts, but the thing is, it might take anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes to do both those upgrades. So we might lose part of the period to that on Monday. All right. If he gives me the machines by tomorrow, then I might just take them home with me and do the upgrades myself. All right. But we'll see how that works. All right. So again, Xcode is the editor we're going to be using. It is an IDE. I showed you a picture of it the other day, if you don't remember, because it took some time to get those pictures to come up, but it's in here someplace. Where is it? It looks like that, but it's not colored like that. So again, this will be your toolbar area, your navigator area, which is a lot like a Project Explorer. That's your editor area where you'll enter all your code, or where you'll see your GUI. That'll be your debug area, so if you log anything, it'll come down there. This is a three-pronged area. It's your inspector up here. That's kind of like your properties window that we've been working with. All right. This is kind of like your toolbox down here, and this is a utility area. You can make the stuff that appears in here different by clicking some of these different entries that you see up here. You can expand these things and contract these things based on some of the buttons that are up here. All right. It'll make a lot more sense when you have it in front of you. Page 11 in the book. Okay, so they got it in your book too. All right, but it is all the same stuff. But again, that picture that's in there that's on page 11, first of all, it's not showing, it looks like. But second of all, okay, that's a picture of Xcode 5. And again, we have to use, I believe you have to use Xcode 6 in order to do Swift stuff. And I at least want to get into that in the last couple weeks of class. All right. So you're going to see it's got the same kind of coloring combinations, etc., that you've seen before. So there's nothing in there that's new. I will tell you that when you're filling stuff out, and again, boy, I don't know why it's not showing me pictures, but it's not. There's a lot of these graphics are just not being shown here. That's nice. All right. But when we go through and we're doing some of this stuff, some stuff will be filled out for you automatically. And what changed? There was a big change between Xcode 4 and Xcode 5. You say, do we have to be concerned with that? No, but the only reason I'm telling you that is I have to see Xcode 6 because I can look at it and tell whether there's been a big change between Xcode 5 and Xcode 6. Why shouldn't I have Xcode 6 on there and the latest operating system? Why shouldn't you learn the newest stuff? I don't want you to learn one that's a version or two old. I don't see the advantage of doing that. Yeah, you're right. I'd already signed in, so I don't know why that would be a problem. This is from my CourseSmart account. All right, this hasn't been a problem before. That looks better. All right, so you can see that the stuff will be color-coded like you've seen before. This area again in here, notice all those other areas that are in here, you can hide them all if you want to. All right, and if you're just writing code, you may want to do that. On the other hand, if you've got over here, if you've got your storyboard showing, which is like your form that we've been working with in VB and the like, if you've got that, then you'll have this part open over here. You can take this and you can expand and collapse this too if you want to. All right, so all this stuff in here, there's a lot of stuff that you can play with it. This button right here, you see where the mouse is? That's your run button. That's the easiest way to run a program. There are other ways. That's the way I'm going to do it 100% of the time. Not only that, it's kind of like what you have in ASP.NET, and that if you don't click that one, that stops the run. The emulator stays open. And it's recommended that if you've got, it's an emulator, so it'll look like a little iPhone, all right, on your screen. Don't sit there and run the emulator and then run the emulator again, because you can lock the system up by doing that. That's the worst thing that'll happen, is it'll lock up and you'll have to reboot it. All right. All right. We've talked a little bit about some of these things that are in here. Notice if you still write a straight file in .c, it's got a .c extension. Notice you can write a file in C++ with a .cpp extension. Again, your header files will be your .h's. Your implementation files will be your .m's. The rest of the stuff we don't care about. Literally everything you'll do will be a .h or it'll be a .m. Okay? And if you just keep that in mind, you'll be fine. All right. Right here, this is a typical Hello World program. So if you look, and I can just do this very quickly in front of you, literally. Let me cut down the size here. And what I'm doing right here, and the reason I'm showing you this, is if you look, there's the same program that you see on the right written in C as opposed to on the left in Objective-C. And what I'm trying to get across to you is, notice if you choose, you can write console applications in Objective-C. Did you hear what I said? Literally, they will appear in that console, that debug area that's in the bottom center of the screen. All right? But I'm not, again, what are we going to get out of doing that? I want to start writing GUI stuff right away. I think that's a better way of doing it. All right? So notice again, printf, nslog. And when you do an nslog like that, if you want to print out a string, you've got to preface it with the @ sign, like you see right there. Again, these are just some of the weird rules that the language has. They're not rules that I made. All right? So you can see there are, it doesn't look that different to go from one to the other if you're writing an application like that. All right? Again, if you write it here, that's the debug area there, so that's where you're going to see your output. Okay. As I mentioned the other day, when you run that and you get the output, as you can see right there, it'll always show you the date and the time. And I don't think, at least, there's a way that you can even suppress that. You're always going to have that. In other words, if you do log anything, you'll always get all that information, whether you want it or not. All right. So they have you build a simple app. This is the app that they have you build is the equivalent of like what we did at the beginning of the C class for like a Hello World type of thing. All right. So there's not a lot in there. They also mentioned that there is a thing that you can use that's called Terminal. That's kind of max version of when we go in and we do this. You know, when we do our CL, etc., for our C programs, Terminal is kind of the Mac equivalent of doing that. I don't see an advantage of ever doing that. You can, it works, but I don't see an advantage of doing that. Xcode should always work. All right, whether you're doing a GUI or a non-GUI program. All right, then they walk through every single line that's in here starting on page 18 of the chapter. And the idea is, when you run through it, again, it's import. I already mentioned this, rather than include. And what import does is it sees if that particular file has already been added to the program. If it has been added to the program already, it won't add it again. All right? And if it has not been added, then it will add it. Okay? This says to go over to the foundation framework and grab the foundation.h header file and include it in our program. Okay, that's where a lot of the stuff for NS object has been defined. All right, I mentioned this the other day. This line right here, it's your typical main, and that allows you to pass in stuff from the command line if you want to. argc is argument count. That's the number of arguments you pass in. Each argument is put in an array that's called argv, which stands for argument vector. So that is a constant string array. Okay. The auto release pool, we talked about this before. This is put in so you don't have to, every single time you create an object, all right, those objects aren't removed for you automatically unless you use what's called arc or automatic reference counting. By having the auto release pool in here, you're using arc. So you don't have to worry about what are called retains and releases. The stuff will be done for you already. And all it's saying is when you're done with the program, release this, whatever objects I have, release the memory. That's all it's saying. Yes and no. Yes, it is, except that technically Objective-C doesn't have garbage collection. Like in Java, you can call system.gc, which calls the garbage. There is no equivalent of that here. All right, but yeah, it's similar in that way. But what it does is it rather than using garbage collection, is it keeps what's called a retain count. And as long as that retain count is 1 or more, it keeps the whatever the object is in scope. When it reaches 0, it just gets rid of it automatically. All right, garbage collection doesn't do that. It flags it and then it checks it, then it gets rid of it. But here, it automatically releases the memory as soon as that count is 0. All right, that used to be a logistical nightmare for programmers who shared different objects, and that's why they decided not to do it like that anymore. The biggest thing, you still can do it like that, but it's very rarely done. All right, just like with C, lowercase and uppercase are distinct, so it's case sensitive. It's case sensitive in variable names. It's case sensitive in method names, etc. All right, and what you're going to notice is when the IntelliSense clicks in. All right, so if it clicked in and it said you wanted to do something, and you screw up the casing, what's going to happen is it's going to flag it right to the left. You're going to have like a pinkish type of thing that's going to be there, and it's going to say that there's an error right there. It's letting you know. I mean, you can choose not to fix it, and it'll try to run it, but it'll give you an error. But it'll tell you right away when you've got an error. Okay, the compiler is very good, is what I'm saying that way. All right. So if you want more about the import statement, okay, there it is. If you want more about main, there it is. If you want more about the auto release, there it is. All right. And they mentioned here again, then they start going nuts with NS log. That's not that big of a thing in here. But notice, I want to jump into this because this is kind of important, where it says displaying the value of variables, and this is the top of page 23. All right? That should look pretty familiar to you. And that line that you see right there where I'm putting the mouse over it and over it and over it, that could have also been a %d, and that would have worked fine. But notice when you say NSLog, if you're printing out a string like that, notice how you need the @ sign before it. It won't work otherwise. And I will tell you, it's going to drive you nuts. I still forget to put it in, or I put it in where I don't need it. But it's more this way, that I put NSLog and I just forget to put the darn @ sign like you see in there. And the @ sign does not go inside of the double quotes, it goes outside of the double quotes. All right? So it's a simple example. Int sum equal 50 plus 25. The sum plus 50 and 25 is, and that's what it prints out. The stuff that we do in here for the rest of the semester, by and large, I'm going to give you all the code. We're going to be doing it as a class. All right? And I talked to Kristen, and I wish I would have done that. I gave her one of the things I promised her and not the other one. There is a chance I may have to pay for it myself, but if she says, yeah, the school will pay you back, this weekend I'm going to try to get Camtasia for the Mac. And if I get Camtasia for the Mac, all I have to do is just hook it up to my Mac and then undo the connection here, put in my connection. That we have to play with a little bit because the resolution is funky when you go to Mactown. All right, just so you know. But then I will be able to tape everything. All right, and save them as, they're not saved as a regular Camtasia file. It's a different type of Camtasia file. But I can still take them over here then, and I can still produce them over here, because that's what I did last semester, and I should still be able to upload them. I don't think YouTube is agnostic that way. I don't think it cares where it's getting the MP4s from. All right. So best case scenario, we're not going to have a problem with it. And I'm hoping that's already done by next Monday. I got to remember to, I'm sure she's gone for the day, but I'll have to remember to try to talk to her tomorrow. Okay. All right, that's chapter 2. All right, chapter 3, again, if you're still confused as to what an object is, you can look on the bottom of page 27. Okay, this is all stuff we've talked about before. They talk about a car object and what you do with it. This is a very standard type of thing. They talk about what methods are, etc. This is, again, all stuff we've talked about. So notice this. Again, I told you before, that's the syntax that we're going to be using for all this. Where it says receiver, that's the name of your object. Where it says message, that's the name of your method. That's the syntax that we'll use for this. All right? And all I can tell you is that as we're doing this stuff, and Zach, I don't know if you ever figured that out yesterday. Did you ever get that your CSS file to work? And set up it? Okay, then it worked? Okay. Because the reason I'm asking is there are going to be times, you know, like you and Kelly were talking yesterday that, wait a minute, Kelly's right next to me. We type the same stuff in, and I'm getting this error message, and he's not. And sometimes at least I'm going to tell you, or Mike's going to tell you, then type it in again. Remove it and type it in again. Because occasionally something happens, and I can't give you an explanation as to why. You know, again, it's the old joke, you know, and this happened to me for years. I was going over to my mechanic because I kept hearing this weird noise, which would always stop right as I pulled in. So eventually I got a tape recorder, and I taped it. Oh, I know what that is. I'm like, geez, why didn't I get a tape recorder sooner? Type of an idea. But here, there are going to be, sometimes there are going to be things that are happening that we don't have an explanation for. All right. But my hope is that you can get enough of a comfort level in this semester that next semester we're going to hit the floor running. We're going to write about 5 or 6 apps next semester as a class. They'll get progressively harder. And after we get done with one, I'm going to say, now here, I'm going to give you an assignment that'll be something similar to what we just did. And say, now you write it. All right, that's what we're going to do. That's what the whole class is about. All right. And it'll be like that in the, John will tell you, it pretty much was the way that it was in the Android class too. Those people were guinea pigs. They had it much tougher than you did. All right, because I was learning it along with them. All right, and there were times when people would ask me questions and I'd be like, geez, I don't have a friggin' clue as to why that didn't work. All right, where now at least hopefully we will. All right. So here's some examples. We create a car object that's called your car. Okay, so you'll notice we're calling the prep method and the drive method and the wash method and the get gas method, etc. All right? So you're going to see all this kind of stuff. All right. What the author does throughout this book is he builds a class that allows you to play with fractions. You understand what I'm saying? You can say, oh, decimals. No, he allows you to play with fractions. And he expands upon this as the book goes on. So for instance, a little later, if you put in 1/3 for your first fraction and you put in 6/17 for the second fraction, and you tell it you want it to add them, it'll convert this to what? 17/51, and it'll convert that to 18/51, and it'll give you your answer of 35/51. Okay, so it does that. That's what it'll do. But he starts out real small. He says, we got a class, and right now that class is going to have just two data members in it, a numerator and a denominator, which we're setting verbatim. And we're just going to print out that's the fraction by putting one over the other one. This is starting out, you know, this is like what we're going to do is we're going to teach you to swim, but rather than putting you in the kiddie pool, we're going to show you a film of people in a kiddie pool, because this isn't the way you would do it. All right, we've already talked a little bit about that. There's no, they're writing this like almost like a C program. There's no .h, there's no .m that they're worrying about here. They're just putting everything in the same file. And just to show you that you could do it this way. And he'll keep building on this and building on this throughout the book. All right. Then finally what he does in the last chapter or two is he goes back and he builds it using a GUI. That's what he does right near the end. All right. Yes. This, yeah, it basically what it says is that I'm working with, I want to print out a string object. When you think add, you're working with objects. All right. That's the best thing I can tell you for right now. All right. So he again explains this, what the numerator is, what the denominator is, and how you're putting one in front of the other. Then he says, well, come on. What we have to do is we have to start setting it up like this. Okay, so this is page, what, 31 in the book. And the author says right here, he starts mentioning this actually on the bottom of page 30. All right. And he says, this is what we had, but that's not really the way you should do it. It'll work. It'll still say the fraction is 1/3. But really, you're not doing anything with fractions. You're giving two numbers, and you're saying, show me one number, show me a divide symbol, and show me the other number. That's not really math. All right. So he says, let's start working with it. Let's actually create a class to do this. So if you look at this, and what I want you to get out of what's shown right here is this. All right, right now, in this section right here, this is our interface section, this is our implementation section, fine. But what they're saying is, right now, what we're going to have in this example that they're showing right here is we've got this thing, a class called fraction. Fraction extends or inherits, is inherited from NS object. And fraction will have three methods in it: print, set numerator, and set denominator. All three of those methods will not return anything. That's the void that you see here, here, and here. That means it doesn't return anything. All right. Print doesn't require anything. You could put parens there, but you don't even have to anymore if there aren't any arguments. Set numerator requires an int. Set denominator requires an int. The n and the d are just names that we're going to use for them in those files. So then in our implementation section, it looks pretty much the same, except we've got set numerator and set denominator. When you first look at this, you might say, okay, this program in many ways isn't much better than the last one they showed. It really and truly isn't, except when you get down to the bottom. All right? This is where we start looking at stuff that, for lack of better words, is specific to this language. All right? And I wish I could do that, and I'll just hold it, so because I don't want that thing to show, or does it show? Yeah, it shows there. I don't like that. So I'll just hold that. Okay? So what this says is we're going to do this in one line as opposed to two. All right, so what they show right here, this is done so often in your program that typically, instead of writing it like this, which is fine, there's nothing at all wrong with writing it this way, but almost always, instead of writing it like this, what you're going to see is you'll write it like this. What is it, alloc init or init alloc? I think it's alloc init. It'll look like that. All right, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. It'll look like that. So you, in other words, you could write it as 2 lines or you could write it as 1 line. Okay? And they're showing it here as 2 lines. But notice they're calling my fraction now, and they're setting the denominator to 1 and the numerator to 3. But what they could have done here, so in this big program, let's just grab this whole program here, because I want to show you why I think the author is showing it to you like this. All right, so we look at this, and it's like, big deal. So we create a fraction. It's called my fraction, and we're going to set the numerator to 1 and the denominator to 3. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy. But there's nothing to stop me from doing this. All right, and then coming through here and saying, now we set that one to 1 over 3, but I could create another one, and I could set it to 6 over 98 by doing this. In the first example that they showed, you couldn't do that, but now that he's starting to create a class out of this, we can create multiple instances. That's all I'm trying to show you here. All right, and notice that when we declare it, we use the asterisk. But when we use it, we'll very rarely use the asterisk. When you're declaring it with an asterisk like that, what you're saying is I'm working with an object. Okay? All right. Again, I'm running through this kind of quickly, but some of it we've already looked at before. This interface section we've already talked a little bit about. That's where you declare your variables and you give your method headers. You say what it's going to look like. The implementation is where you actually put your code, and the program section is typically where you put your main. All right. So if you want more on it, there's the interface section. They talk about names, naming constructs, etc. All right. And they'll also get in here and they'll talk about the other stuff that's in here. This is probably the most important thing that we've even looked at so far, and we talked a little bit about it the other day. This is the top of page 37. Notice what the author is showing you there. All this stuff here that you see right there, I can't, it's a graphic, so I can't change it. But if I come in here and I type in what they have, which is minus, you can put a space here, you don't need to. And a lot of times they don't put one there either. This is what you're going to see. So this kind of line of code, this is what all that means. The minus sign means that it's an instance method. All right. The void means it doesn't return anything. The return type is type void. Set numerator with the colon. Actually, the name of this method is not set numerator. Technically, the name of this method is set numerator colon. And that colon becomes more important again when you start passing a lot of stuff in. All right. So that's the name of the method. That's the argument that you need for the method, the type of the argument, and that's the name of that argument. So int n goes together. And I showed you this the other day. This would be like as though we were back in C land again and we were typing in, we would say here, void set numerator int n. You see the difference? Because you're going to have to understand this stuff. All right? And when I say that, you might use, what do you mean, to get it to work and we're going to have to understand it? No, we're going to have the code in front of us. But to me, if all you're doing is typing in code and you don't have an understanding of what you're typing in, I'm doing you a disservice, not a service. So a lot of times when we type something in, we'll type a little bit, then we'll go back and we'll look at the code. We'll type in some more and we'll go back and we'll look at the code. All right? Because to me, that's how you're going to learn. And I strongly encourage you then, after you've got it and we get it to work, make a copy of it. Rip it apart and start changing some stuff to see what happens. Because when you're working on your own stuff next semester, and you will be eventually, you'll make mistakes. We all do. More on the implementation section here on page 37. And the program section again, which is your main, as I mentioned. He does a pretty good job. And again, you know, John and I were having a talk this morning. Hopefully he doesn't mind I'm saying this, and if he does, it's going to be too late by the time he says something. But he mentioned to me this morning, I'm paraphrasing, but he mentioned to me this morning that there was a guy who came up to him yesterday, and basically John was talking to him, and he said he was leaving because he just was totally lost, all right, in the JavaScript class, I think it was. And the thing is, I asked John, and it's not like he was real forthcoming with this, but he said, yeah, a lot of times when he can see the person, he can see their screen, and they're not in class, they're not exactly doing JavaScript in class, and it looks as though when you look at their book, they probably haven't opened it yet. All right. Bottom line is, I have very little sympathy for somebody who has not made an attempt to do anything on their own, has not read the book, has not watched the tapes, and does not pay attention in class. I don't think that's any of you in here. You all pay attention. So that shouldn't be an issue. But what I'm going to tell you is there are going to be times when we key something in that you might say to me, can you explain what this is? And I might say, yeah, but I'm not going to right now because it's a fairly advanced topic. And to show it, to explain it to you right now, you'd be like, okay. But eventually you're going to be like, okay, I get it, but you're really going to be thinking, I don't have a clue. And it'll make more sense when we get into it a little bit more. That's all. All I will tell you is this book is a really good resource. If you get a chance, read through it. All right, there's 21 chapters in it. You know, some of the chapters are really short. You go home and go, yeah, I'll do chapter 1 tonight. It was 4 pages. Okay. But even if you spend 2 or 3 weeks on it, and you won't absorb every single thing that's in it, but it'll at least start to familiarize you with the stuff that's in it. That's all I'm saying. All right. He keeps going through example after example after example in this chapter of going through this fraction program. And most of them are really similar to one another, and that's why I'm just skipping over it. I'm not saying that it's not important. Of course it would be important. I mean, I went and read the book during the summer, okay? And I started saying, I can give them exercises out at the end of the chapters, but by and large, the exercises are kind of stinky. They're not very good. All right, so I figured we'd just do a bunch of stuff on our own, okay? You will have a different book. We're not going to use this book in full. Not sure which book we're going to use yet because the book I want to use hasn't been totally written. So I'm trying to get them to give me an electronic copy of it. All right, they're fighting me on that, but I'm like, okay, then I'll be using some other publishers because they'll give me copies. And they're like, well, then maybe we'll get you something. All right. Data types. Most of this chapter, you know. Again, an int's an int. A float's a float. A char is a char. So they show some examples. Those are simple variables. Notice if you use simple or what are often called primitive variables, you don't use the asterisk. Okay? None of those have asterisk unless you're printing them out. But that, or the, not asterisk, the @ sign. That @ sign is still needed because it says it's a string object that you're using to print them out with. But notice that every one of these. And also note that when you're working with strings, strings must be in double quotes, characters like this in single quotes. Yeah. When you print them out, it's the same. But the difference between them is technically a double is a long float. Because what the difference between them is that double allows you to have more precision, both before the decimal place and after the decimal place. I think floats, I think floats are only good through they're only valid through 6 decimal places, where doubles are valid for 17 decimal places. So it depends on what you're using them for. All right, but you're right. When you print them out, you're going to use the %F for both, whether it's a float or whether it's a double. All right. And they show you a %E here. I've never even used that. That's exponential. All right, so let's plot with this. All right. Again, notice what you can use here. Long, long, long. So what's the difference between all these? It's the amount of precision, and it's how big you can make something. All right. Notice there's unsigned. If I use a short, for example, if I use a short integer has got a range of negative 32,767 to 768 to positive 32,767. All right. If I make it an unsigned, so that would be a short. If I make it an unsigned short, now it goes from 0 to 65,536. Everybody get that? You can do that with anything. Sometimes it'll make sense that you're working with ages. You should never allow a negative value, so you make it unsigned. Now you've just doubled your range on the positive side. All right. What's the difference between a long and a long long? It's how much you can store in it. I've never worked with a long long. I've never had the reason to do that. All right. ID, I mentioned this last time. Notice what it says here. This is page 54 in the book. And the author says right here, an ID is used to store an object of any data type. For lack of better words, it's a wild card type of character. So it doesn't matter if what you're pointing to is a character, or it's a string, or it's something else. You can use ID with anything. But if you use ID all over the place in your program, the program will run slower, not faster, because the system has to figure out what the data type is. Because again, ID by itself is generic in nature. And they'll get into it more in later chapters too. All right, precedence, it's the same precedence that you see everything else. The idea again is when in doubt, use parentheses, otherwise you might not get the result you're looking for. Okay? Modulus is still modulus. It's same thing, percent sign. Plus, minus, multiply, divide. They're still the same signs that you've seen before. Other than the NS log, you could write these programs right now. They're the same programs we did in C. Okay, they're really... NS log is like printf, but NS log is designed to go to the console. That's the log console. That's where the log comes from. All right, so rather than printing it like we have it, where it prints it on the, an actual DOS screen, it's printing it as part of Xcode itself. All right, but yeah, it's very similar. You cast the same way you cast it in C. You take the type and you put it inside of parentheses. Okay, so nothing different there. You can use plus equals, minus equals, times equals, divide equals, and modulo equals like you could in C. So here at the end, this is probably the best part of this chapter. Starting here on page 65, the author goes through and says, okay, this is what our calculator class is going to look like. And this is kind of cool just because of the fact it is actually showing what a what an Objective-C program will look like. So in other words, notice there's the beginning of our interface, there's the end of our interface. And what we have in here are we have a bunch of methods. All right, we've got a set accumulator method, a clear method, an accumulator method, an add method, a subtract method, a multiply method, and a divide method. And it's simple enough that you all understand what those methods do. If I've got two fractions and I've got a multiply method, I'm saying multiply one fraction by the other one and give me the result, type of an idea. But he goes to painstaking lengths to show you how you can add fractions, etc., back in the ways you probably learned back in grade school or junior high and you've long since forgot about. So he goes through all those. All right, and he starts real simple. Okay, and he's trying to create a very simple little calculator with not much in it. I want to quickly jump through the next two chapters. Why? Because it's all just to show you there's nothing new. The next chapter, chapter 5, is on looping, and chapter 6 is on decisions, and then we're done for the period. All right, looping, those look familiar? For loop, while loop, do while loop. Same exact loops we had in C. All right, so they'll show you examples, and they've got the for loop. That should look familiar to all of you because you've written those before. Again, I wouldn't say n equals n plus 1. I'd say n plus plus or plus plus n. Okay? Same relational operators. No change here. Unlike what we're going to get into, and we've talked a little bit about, but not too much in PHP, there's no triple equal operator in C or Objective-C. All right? Which is both equality and identity. You can't do that. You can't put a triple equal sign. It won't work. Yes. No. No. Yeah. No. In that case, it's not going to matter. All right. So they, again, write it with a for loop. There's with the plus plus, and they show you a triangular number. It's all fine and dandy. And then they go and they show you the same program with also with a while loop and with a do while loop. Okay. Then they talk about input here. Wow. Oh my God, I thought that thing had gone away and we'd never use it. All they're showing you here is it's possible to use scanf in an Objective-C program. All right. If we're doing stuff with GUIs, that's not going to be an issue. And does everybody realize, the stuff that you've been doing before we got into GUIs in Java, where you were using option panes and stuff? You know what I'm talking about? That was kind of scanf. But it was kind of GUIized scanf. But you found out that it's much easier to blow it up in Java than it is in C. You saw that in C when I was putting in bad values and I couldn't make the program blow up. All right, I should have shown you some of the stuff I was working on the other night. That's all it was doing, was blowing up. All right, you can nest for loops, not a problem. There's the while. So he goes back and writes the same program using a while. You know all this stuff already. There's nothing new in here. Then he does the do while. He calls it a do. I've always called it a do while. And he again goes back and writes the same exact program, again this time using a do while loop. All right. Break works the same. Continue works the same. Nothing new in there. All right. Then with decisions, if, switch, and the ternary, or the conditional operator, the question mark colon, same stuff we had in C. So there's the syntax. All right. But notice what you're doing here. Somebody tell me, what does this mean? Anybody. And don't read the stuff on the next page because that'll help you. What is this right here? What does this mean? Yeah, I mean, we all know what that if means, but what does the other line below the if, what is it telling it to do? No, you're being way too literal. It's calling the max exceeded method, and it's calling that method on the playlist object. Object, method. All right. So that would probably say something like, it would probably print out a message for the person, you can't load any more songs. You've reached your maximum, or whatever it would be. Does that make sense? All right. But again, that's the way that you do it here. In some languages, you would, if you were going to call this right here, in some languages, that line, oops, try that again. In some object-oriented languages, if you ran that line, instead of having it look like this, it would look like this. It would look like that. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to try to confuse you, but sometimes Objective-C lets you write it like that if you want to. All right, you can make your code look very Java-ish or very C-ish, looking at it that way, where it looks like that looks like something you do with almost with a structure or whatever. And you can do that sometimes in Objective-C. But most of the time, even when you can, you'll see in most books they'll say, you can do this, but we recommend that you don't. All right, this is the way that it's recommended, the syntax type of way that you use. All right, because somebody a lot smarter than me figured out that would be the syntax that you're supposed to use. So there's a typical if without an else. There's an if with an else. Notice we can have, yeah, remember that guy from JavaScript? You can have NaN. Notice it's a big A, but you can have NaN in Objective-C, not a number. Why would you do that? Because if you were going to let the person do division, you would check. If the denominator is not equal to 0, do it. Otherwise, return not a number. No. No, it's about as easy as it was in C. It'll still let you do some illegal stuff. All right. All right. Again, if you've got an if, you can have as many. If you want to, you can have as many if-else's as you want. There's just one, but you can have as many as you want. You know all this stuff already. You can have compound relational tests. What is this? What is that? All right, and what's and? That, right? Same thing. Doesn't change. Here's a really ugly leap year test. All right. Why is that kind of important? Just so you see it, because I don't think I did this with you guys, but I'm doing it with the first year people, wherever I put it. I decided to come in and show them some stuff that I was at least hoping they could actually use. But the problem is I don't remember which one of these it is. Nope, that definitely isn't it. But on one of these, I wrote a thing that went through. Nope, it's not indeed. There either. All right, talking about years, etc. But in one of these, I think it's, I hope it's that one. Yes, it is. Good. All right. So I wanted to show people, I know this is really ugly output, but notice that when you go through this, take a look at the leap years. Non-leap year 28, non-leap year 28, leap year 29. And I let the thing programmatically figure it out for me. All right. And these are just things that I'll tell. The reason I'm mentioning this to you is as you start, I mean, especially next semester, you might start applying for jobs, etc., you know, going to job fairs, doing whatever. This is the kind of stuff that people are going to look at on your programs. They're going to say, oh, okay, Mark's applying for this job, and I see he's got this program here that's working with dates. I wonder if it handles leap years. They will check stuff like that if you give them code. All right, whether it's electronic or non-electronic code. That's the kind of stuff they will look for. Because they want people who are persnickety, that'll look for all that stuff, and are doing stuff that they think should be being done. All right, and if you don't do it, well, that's how you'll be remembered then. You can nest ifs. Just about done. I think we are done. Oh, they do talk in here about the conditional, and they talk about switch, but the switch statement is the same exact switch statement. I think I've mentioned this to you, but in case I haven't, when we go in and we talk about the switch, I want to get down to there. So when you come in and you start writing a switch, something like this, all right, again, hopefully this makes sense to you. All right, what is this doing? This is calling, on the desc-calc object, it's calling the add method and it's passing in value 2. Calling the subtract method and passing in value 2. The multiply and passing that in. The divide and passing that in, etc. All right, and one of the things they've changed with Swift is there are no more break statements. It finds one, it does it, and it gets the heck out. Okay. The conditional is that question mark colon operator. All right, so you put a condition in. After the question mark is the true action. After the colon is the false action. And that's it. That's what I wanted to run through with you now. The last thing I'll tell you, it doesn't affect this class, but it's for the class tomorrow at this time. John will tell you this, that we were talking yesterday about the prime number program, and literally, and now granted, I've got a lot more experience than you do, so you know it would take you longer. I get that, But John, how long did it take me to write both the prime number programs? 5 minutes to get them both done. And I used the same one that I gave you guys, that test file. Remember where you put in a number and you put the messages in? I used that exact file. And all I did was put in a function call for prime numbers. And then for printing out the prime numbers between 1 and 100, I put it in a loop. Literally. It was not hard at all. And with the stuff that you've been assigned, we did 3 of them as a class, and those were the other 2. So I didn't think the assignment was anything that was that ungodly. And you raise your hand and go, no, that's the ASP.NET stuff. That's what's ungodly. All right. So that's all that I had. Again, ideally at least, on Monday when you come in here, we're going to have a machine there, we're going to have a machine there, a machine here, and maybe 2 of them over there. All right, you know what I mean? And I'm going to have my own. All right, and they're all going to be Macs. In the worst case scenario, I won't have the Camtasia then, and the first lecture or 2 won't be taped. In the best case, and I'll find that out tomorrow, I'll have that. The idea is if I tell them if I front I found it where I can get it for about $100, and if I front the $100, if they say they'll pay me back, and I might buy it anyway, even if they say they won't. The thing is, if I buy it and they won't pay me back, they ain't getting it. The school seems to have this kind of an idea, well, that's ours anyway. No, it's not. Yeah, it's on my machine, all right, that I paid for. So, no. All right, so when we come back to the book, eventually we'll get into this stuff, and this is specific to Objective-C, all right?